Hello, and welcome to the Big Yearning podcast, released alternate Mondays at 5 p.m. UK time. We are two life coaches who really enjoy meaningful conversations about big questions. Our work and our lives have been shaped by these questions, and they've taken us to some amazing places in our lives and in ourselves. We all long for things. We all carry big yearnings in our hearts. And over the next hour or so, we hope to touch on some of these feelings and perhaps give you ideas or insights to help you get clearer about what you long for and how to get it.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to episode 23 of the Big Yearning podcast. My name's Neil, and I'm the one who's steady and considered, but sometimes a bit overcautious.
And my name's Alexander, and I've got the big focus on determination and personal strength and understanding, but I do often forget to be present and enjoy what's actually going on around me.
So yes, welcome to new and existing listeners alike. If this is your first time tuning into us, you can find out more about our podcast via our Facebook and Instagram pages. Simply search the Big Yearning podcast and you will find us there. We very, very much welcome feedback about the podcast. We really thrive on feedback. And we particularly welcome suggestions or ideas for episode topics. I think in recent times we've done a couple of episodes which have been the result of direct requests from listeners, those being the episodes on sleep and the most recent episode we did on death and dying. So please, if there's anything you would like to hear me and Alexander discuss, please do let us know via our social media pages or contact us individually. If you do want to contact us individually, we will give you our contact details at the end of this episode. Our topic today is belonging and how we might get more a sense of that in our lives and what exactly belonging is, drilling down on a definition of that. But before we go on to that, we will have a check-in. Now, regular listeners will know that me and Alexander begin each episode with a check-in every fortnight. And a check-in is I see a check-in as a way of connecting with ourselves and each other. It's a way of orientating ourselves to what's honest and true for us, what's alive in us in this moment. And it's something that me and Alexander do on a regular basis outside of this podcast. We check in with each other and a mutual friend 3 times a week. And we found it really, really helpful to do this, particularly during lockdown, to maintain that social contact. And like I say, to keep ourselves true and honest and authentic and allow ourselves to be vulnerable as well. So, with no further ado, Alexander, how are you today, my friend?
Thanks, Neil. I'm doing good. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Brighton, and I'm looking across the water. The sea has been really calm lately. It's just been very beautiful, and I've really got this sense that spring is arriving, along with the end of the lockdown and the possibility of seeing more friends and doing some group stuff. I've seen my first in-person coaching clients, and that's been really nice. I saw somebody yesterday who's a long-running client, and I haven't really seen him. I haven't seen him in person for, I think, over a year. And it was just so lovely to be back in the room with him. We really enjoyed that session, and it felt like reprising an old friendship almost. So that was brilliant. And I'm still loving this big surge in coaching clients that are coming forward. I think people are just beginning to feel like they can think about the future again, and coaching just fits in really well with that. So people are coming towards me because they're having families and they want to come to terms with that. They have had big changes in their lives. They've got big goals they want to achieve in the future. And a lot of people have just been in lockdown and stuck with themselves for a year. And they've just kind of realised things about themselves that they want to work on. They want to change. They want to shift. So really enjoying a lot of the work that's coming forward at the moment. And I do just feel a real huge privilege for the work that I'm able to do, and the connections that I form with my clients, the vulnerability they're willing to bring, and then the changes we're able to achieve. It's an incredibly fulfilling thing to be doing. So loving all that. That's all brilliant. There's a big kind of shift coming up for me in my coaching work. There's a new website coming online with a new focus, which is a lot more sort of vulnerable and honest about what's different about what I do compared to what a lot of coaches do. I have been doing this for 10 years. I've really learned to specialize in a particular area of personal and professional development and a particular approach. Some of it is kind of summed up in my book, Deep Joy, and it's continuously evolving, but there's this really strong focus sort of emerging that makes me different from what a lot of other people do. So just replacing the current website, which is fine, and it just says, I'm a coach with a background in philosophy and I can help you with these sort of things, and replacing that with something that's much more honest and upfront, and just says, if you're looking for someone who does this very specific thing, then I'm probably the best person you're going to find. It's quite a scary thing to be doing. It feels quite risky to separate myself from everyone else, to claim that kind of authority, and to possibly be turning a lot of people away because they'll land and they'll go, no, this very specific thing isn't what I'm looking for. But what I'm just hoping is that if that is what you're looking for, and it really has to do with a journey towards the truth of who you are, your core true identity, and understanding who you've had to become in order to cope with your life compared to who you were underneath. What's struggling to get out? Where does your confidence and your strength and your creativity get lost because you're desperately trying to be things in order to fit in or keep up with your life? How could we get you back to your true self? It's something to do with that. The language is still kind of coming together, but it's something about that. So I'll have more news about that soon, but that's a big piece of work for me at the moment. Other things in my life at the moment, well, I've booked a haircut. That's exciting. There's been an ongoing joke with a lot of my friends about how ridiculous our hair has all been looking. So I've booked my first haircut. That's fine. That's exciting, I guess. And a friend of mine is turning 40 soon and sort of booking... Well, I guess it's a party, but what can you do with the group sizes we're allowed, and trying to work out something exciting and fun for him? It's certainly better than so many of us who've had our birthdays just in lockdown, pretty much alone, having Zoom calls with our family or whatever. So that's fun. That's a thing to grapple with. And then the other thing that's kind of going on for me at the moment is I'm just noticing in myself, in my clients, in my friends, and just things that I'm hearing in wider circles, there's something really hard happening for us collectively right now. We thought the lockdown was going to be hard, and it was. It really, really was. For a lot of us, we were at home with our families, and it's incredibly intense trying to handle that 24/7. Some of us were made unemployed and we're really unsure about the future, or our business has been threatened. Some of us have just been alone for a huge amount of time, and that's really impacted our mental health. And we know that at some point we're going to be back to normal. We're going to be back to our lives. We're going to be back to our jobs. We're going to be going into offices or workplaces or whatever. And we're going to be able to meet up with people, and the streets are going to be filled again. And there's going to be a sense of getting back to things. But there's also this something in the middle. And we didn't really anticipate how hard this was going to be. And there's a lot of anxiety around it. I think a lot of us are just emotionally exhausted from the last year. And simple things like arranging to meet up with friends for the first time in a long time can suddenly seem quite overwhelming or quite difficult. And if perhaps you're not acknowledging those feelings, as a lot of people who aren't engaged in this kind of work don't really notice their feelings all the time, you just end up cancelling plans, or you just end up feeling like you don't really want to do it at the last minute. But there does seem to be a lot of anxiety and fear and apprehension and what is the future going to hold for me? What's actually going to happen when I meet up with people? Handling social situations badly. All sorts of things that we didn't used to kind of have to deal with. We eventually got into some kind of stable state, often, many of us, with this lockdown thing. We knew what our days were going to consist of. We knew kind of how to manage ourselves. And we know how to manage ourselves out there in the world, living our lives. But this bit in the middle isn't something new. And I've certainly been finding that quite challenging. I have had some emotional wobbles, and I've had to focus on sort of self-care around that stuff. And yeah, just a lot of other people telling me that they are also struggling with this time. So that's a thing for me. It feels big for me. But it also feels like a shared kind of gestalt collective thing that's just floating around. So Yeah, I just wanted to name that and say that, yeah, that's a big thing for me at the moment. But, with that aside, as I say, the sun is amazing, spring is amazing, seeing my friends is wonderful, and yeah, feeling excited about this possible relaunch of myself as a coach into the world. So that's me. That massive ramble was my check-in. Neil, would you like to check in?
Thank you, Alexander. That wasn't a ramble. Those were necessary words spoken. That's how I heard them. So thank you for that. Yeah, just following up on what you said about lockdown, some similar feelings for me. I met up with a friend yesterday, a mutual friend of ours we know from Embercombe. First time I'd seen her in ages. We sat outside a cafe in the sun in Frome, which was really lovely. And just noticing how I was just noticing how much I'd really missed that contact, and also we were talking about, I think generally speaking, what might we learn? What can we have learned from this time? So you were talking about, I don't know whether these were your words specifically, but my interpretation, the suffering, the turmoil, the kind of chaos that some people have endured. And what might we learn? How might we come out of this differently in terms of mental health care, in terms of self-care? Might we give ourselves a little bit more time? Might we take our foot off our respective pedals a little bit more? What might our relationship with the natural world be like? How might that be different? I'm particularly thinking of in the very early days of lockdown, how I noticed a lot more. I noticed a lot more pheasants around on my local walks. Quite a shy bird, and because there were so few people around, it was almost like that was an example of a species that had kind of, right, we can come back in. We can almost reclaim a little bit of our space, sort of thing. And then I particularly remember all of the wild flowers that were growing in the hedgerows, and the council weren't cutting the hedgerows, and I don't want to sort of romanticize that time in any way at all. It was tough, it was really hard, and it continued to be tough and hard for a lot of people. And so it's not an either or thing for me. It's a both and. So kind of acknowledging the challenges and the suffering that a lot of people have endured, and also, yeah, okay, this can be a new page. What can we learn? So I really hope, fingers crossed, that we as a culture, as a world community, dare I say, we can move forward with something that is a bit more enlightened, maybe, in terms of how we are and how we live together, and how we live with other species on the planet. Yeah. So thank you for checking in around that. I appreciate that. I too have booked my haircut. At the moment, I look like a cross between a mad scientist and Chairman Mao. I was watching Adam Curtis's latest documentary. Can't remember the name of it, on BBC iPlayer the other day. And there's quite a lot about Chairman Mao in the first couple of episodes. And he's got this hair which just kind of like goes sideways, doesn't go upwards. And I look a bit like that at the moment. So tomorrow, after about 11:15, I'm going to be much more streamlined and ready for spring. For me, the ideal haircut is one where you can shake your head and you don't feel your hair move. That's a very idiosyncratic best haircut situation, I acknowledge. Haircuts aside, I'm doing okay. I mean, I really enjoyed, and I was really looking forward to the easing of the restrictions yesterday. And I took a stroll into Frome, where I live. I just live on the outskirts of Frome, not a very large town in Somerset. And I really enjoy just seeing people milling around, some sense of normality. It's interesting today that we're talking about belonging. I felt, right, that helped my sense of kind of belonging, really, just mingling amongst a few people. It's really lovely. Also, another lockdown change that has impacted on me is that I will be allowed to go and see my dad in the care home where he's living in Glastonbury. I'm going to book in a time, probably in a week and a half, to go and see him. I haven't seen him since July. And people who have listened to the podcast before will know that he had to go into a care home during lockdown. That was quite stressful for everyone involved. We didn't have the opportunity to in person look at a care home. We had to make that decision online. And it's been a real struggle for Dad. It really has. I was talking to him about 3 or 4 days ago, and just the fact of not being able to go outside, and well, you can go outside onto like a patio area, but just not being able to kind of go outside into town. He's not that mobile. So I'm looking forward to seeing him, and I'm looking forward to a time when me and my brother and sister can go and visit him and take him out in a wheelchair, go into Glastonbury Town Centre, get a cup of tea, chew the cud. I'm really, really looking forward to that. So that's up for me at the moment. And last thing to say is about this topic, really. With all the topics that we do for the podcast, I think it's fair to say that for both me and you, respectively, they differentially kind of stir us up in different ways. And I think we'll both speak to this a little bit, but this whole issue of belonging and what it means to us as individuals, I think it's fair to say has challenged us. And that's no bad thing. I certainly see the podcasts as a real opportunity for my learning. It's not just about kind of putting stuff out there for people to listen to. Also, for me, it's about what can I learn today? What is there to be kind of thought about and discussed and reflected upon? So suffice to say, it has been quite a challenging topic, and we will speak more to that a little bit later. So that's my check-in, and with no further ado, I will move on to that topic itself, belonging. So like I said, it has been quite a challenging topic, and one of the things that we were thinking about, we'd like you to consider, if you're listening to this, just to consider a couple of questions as we go through our discussion today. The first one is, what could give you a greater sense of belonging in your life? And secondly, how could you get more of a sense of that? So I'll say this again. The first one is, what could give you a greater sense of belonging in your life? And secondly, how could you get more of that, more of a sense of that? So I will kick us off by way of introduction. For me personally, when I think about the notion of belonging and the experience of belonging, that's not just about belonging to a particular group of people or a family or a work institution or a place. It includes all of those things, but for me, belonging is deeper than that. Belonging for me is something maybe more primal, maybe more archaic, and it speaks to the degree to which I feel I belong here on the planet, the degree to which I feel like there is a Neil-shaped space here on planet Earth for me, that's it's got my name on it kind of thing, which I belong to, which I have a right to be occupying. Now, I fully appreciate that for some people, this aspect of belonging that I've just mentioned won't compute. It might sound a little bit esoteric or a little bit intangible, a little bit abstract even. And people might say, well, you're here, aren't you? You're standing right in front of me. Of course you belong here. What are you talking about? Which is an absolutely fair response. But for me, my life experience and my experience of a lot of other people, not just clients in my work, but people and friends in general, is that I think for some people who didn't have the most secure, nurturing, protected, loving, valued upbringing that they might have had, that for these people, this can lead to a sense of somehow they feel like they don't quite belong. And it might not be something that they can really name or nail or articulate. But I think it's a kind of felt sense of, oh, something isn't quite right. Or as Charles Eisenstein would say, there's an ambient wrongness. Just on the surface, things seem okay. My life's all right. But I don't really quite feel like I fit in, or I don't feel part of things. So when I think about belonging, I also think of like those phrases like fitting in, am I part of things? So in this podcast, we'll speak to both and many more aspects of belonging, I hope. The aspects of like belonging to a community, to a family, those ordinary things we kind of think of, but maybe also talk more about how it is to belong on the planet, how it is to belong as kind of creature on this earth kind of thing. So to sum up, for me, I see belonging as a basic requisite for living an optimal human life. Yeah, that's my introductory piece, Alexander. Over to you, my friend.
Thanks, Ben. So this feels like one of those enormous topics. Like there are things that Neil and I will talk about where we're talking about how to do a thing, how to be vulnerable, or how to get things done, or how to develop personal strength, or how to relate to anger. These are some of the things we've talked about in the past. And there's some of the topics that we talk about where there's a very clear, there's a bunch of information about this, and then what's your personal exploration of it. And then there's a few topics we've touched on. I'm thinking of things like we did one on spirituality, and then we've done a few others which just feel big. They feel enormous. Our last episode on death and dying was very much scratching the surface of that topic because it's so huge. And belonging feels like one of those to me. One of the things that really struck me about this topic, especially when I decided to do some research and read some articles and just see what other people are saying about this, is that no one really seems to understand what it is. There's this understanding that we need belonging. And in my book and in a lot of other personal development or psychology books, you'll find a table of intrinsic human needs, and belonging will absolutely be on there. Everyone kind of acknowledges that belonging is a thing we all need. But what the hell is belonging? When will we feel like we belong? When will we have this feeling met? When will we have this yearning kind of satisfied? So in my kind of reflections about this, I was thinking, well, I need to separate this particular feeling out from other feelings that I have, other yearnings that I have, other needs that might be confused with it. Because how am I ever going to meet this need? How am I ever going to feel that I do indeed belong if I don't really understand what I'm talking about? And it would be so easy to confuse this with the need for love, the need for intimacy, the need for connection, or the need for social interactions that really kind of meet our need for that in that moment. If we were to separate out belonging from other things, then we'd get a clearer sense about what it is. So I then began thinking about people who I know who do have some of those other things ticked. I've thought about one of my really good friends. He lives with his wife and his 2 young children, and his family are a huge part of his life. They tick so many boxes for him. They make him feel loved, and he has constant interactions with all these people who he loves and cherishes deeply, and he feels loved in return. But if I said to him, mate, would you say you have a sense of belonging? I'm pretty sure he would look at me and say, no, I don't feel like I have that. So it's not that. It isn't what a relationship can give us. A lot of us will try to use romantic relationships to try to be everything. Esther Perel talks about this a lot in her work, and her book Mating in Captivity comes to mind. And she says that the big mistakes we make with relationships in modern day is that we try and make our relationship into everything. It has to be our best friend and our partner and our lover and our friend group and our reassurance about ourselves and the person we tell all our troubles to and our identity, our sense of belonging. So we put everything into a relationship. So okay, perhaps it's not that, and perhaps family isn't enough. So I thought, okay, well, that helps me. That separates those things out. And then what I was kind of left with is it's our identity beyond ourself. So it's the idea that there is parts of me that aren't held within me. They're held within the people and the place and the things that I do, and they are reflected back to me. And it's kind of like a call and response thing in singing. It's that there is a part of my identity that I carry, but then my community, my friends, my partner, my family, the place where I am, the things I do with my life, they all echo back to me and they reassure me and they say, yeah, this is who you are. This is your place. This is your identity. And I think that what we're feeling when we don't feel a sense of belonging is the angst of having to carry our whole identity on our own without any reassurance, without any reflection back to us, without shared beliefs and values with the people around us, without that kind of sense that I am seen and I am witnessed and people care and people really do understand who I am, and that helps me to know who I am. It helps to reflect that back to me, and I feel a sense of coming home, a sense of a sense of, yeah, this is my place. I belong here. That was my kind of background thinking around this. How do I get to this root feeling? And then with that feeling really made clear and separated out from other things, right, well, where does my journey go from here? Where do I go looking for belonging? I mean, I would say, Neil was saying earlier how this was quite a triggering topic for the both of us while we were preparing for this episode. And really, it's because we looked at each other and went, do you feel like you belong? Do you have a sense of belonging? And we both said really clearly, no, absolutely not. And it's really hard. And I can just immediately think of dozens of people I know who would say exactly the same thing. I don't have even the remotest sense of belonging. And it's something that I really want. And we're all kind of chasing after this. A lot of the articles I've read were sort of corporations who had realised that they needed to foster a sense of belonging at workplace. That's fine, that's good, that's not a problem. But again, what is it? And I think it comes back to this. There is a bit of me that isn't in me. There's a bit of me which is shared with the people and the place and the things that I do. And it's that echoing, that harmony with my surroundings, that is belonging. That's the definition I'm working with for today. So that's my little intro bit, Neil. Where should we go from here?
I just want to start going from here in terms of just acknowledging, I think what you said there is really profound stuff. I really do. And when we were doing the preparation for this and talking about this, you came up with this idea about, identity not solely existing in us as a single flesh and blood sack human being, but it being more diffuse and aspects of our identity existing in other things around us. I really welcome that as a notion, and I find it it's interesting. I find it both exciting in terms of exploring it more and reassuring, and also I find it makes sense in terms of a lot of the ways that I think about this notion, this topic. So I really welcome what you've brought there, mate. One thing that comes up for me is the word community. And me and you met when we were living in community down in Devon at Embercombe. And one of the things I want to say straight up is I'm going to be talking about a number of experiences to help articulate this notion of belonging. And the vast majority of those experiences, for the vast majority of those experiences, community is at the centre of those experiences. And I just want to say that community for me is not synonymous with belonging. But for me, it's a very strong component part. So when I was reflecting on this, as is often the case with the podcasts, just to give people who are listening a little bit of an insight into my podcast process. I don't know if this is wise or not, but I'm going to go for it. Sometimes me and Alexander, we come up with a topic, and I suddenly think, right, I must go and do loads and loads of research. But then I sort of stop scrabbling, I've stopped paddling frantically, and I say to myself, hang on, Neil, just reflect on your own life. What does your own life inform you about this topic in hand? So rather than making some kind of academic sort of knowledge-based research the core of the podcasts, what I tend to do is make the core of the podcasts my own experience, but then extrapolate it out and see how it can be generalized. So after I'd stopped frantically scrabbling around trying to learn everything about belonging, I turned back to my own experience, and I'm just going to talk a bit about what I discovered in my own experience. Times when I did belong. Okay, so I'm answering this question, one of these questions here. What is belonging and how could I get more of it? So the first example is in my early 20s when I did my psychiatric nurse training. And the ingredients of that experience, the components of it, were that I was welcomed into a ready-made training group, a small group of 12 people. I was offered accommodation. I lived in a nurse's home. I didn't have to go looking for accommodation. I was paid as a student nurse. So I was learning and I was receiving an income. I was based in a hospital. So I had a place, an institution where I worked. And also I had a sense of shared purpose. I was embarking on this amazing journey with 11 other people, and we had a shared aim, a shared purpose. So for me, when I think about belonging, I think, you see, that experience couldn't have worked for me. I wouldn't have got through my training, I don't think, unless I felt I belonged there. And it was my first time I'd left home, so it's quite a big deal for me. So the very fact that I was welcomed into this place where everything was set up, and I could commit to something. So in terms of belonging, I could commit to a purpose. I could commit to a project. Also, there was a concrete place in terms of an actual building, an actual area in which my learning and my growth and my development took place. So for me, that was comforting and reassuring. I felt like I belonged to the institution. Now, institutions can be really bad things in terms of habitual practices and secrecy and privacy and all that kind of stuff. And I acknowledge all of that. But for me, what I want to acknowledge, actually, the positive sides of an institution in terms of sense of belonging and coming together. For me, that was really, really helpful. So that was the first experience where I felt like I'd really, really belonged. And then the second one was many years later, actually. Interestingly enough, was when I owned an allotment in Bristol with my friend Tess. And there was something there for me about the land, about the earth, about having a direct relationship with the earth, with the soil, with nature. Round about that time, I was doing a lot of reading into nature-based philosophies and anthropology and those associated topics. And I read a book by a guy, Tobias Jones, called Utopian Dreams. And one of the things that he did, his book was about his journeying around Great Britain and Europe. And he went to spend some time living in about 5 different communities. And at the end of his book, he distilled down the kind of core ingredients of what made communities work. So again, community not synonymous with belonging, but kind of integral to it. And what he found was that there was a sense of belonging for him in places where there was some relationship with the land, where they worked the land, where people attempted to kind of feed themselves. And secondly, there was a belief system, a spiritual path, or very loosely at the most, an agreed kind of sense of purpose, made those things work. And then thirdly, the next kind of experience that really informed my sense of belonging was going to live and work at a meditation centre down in Devon, Gaia House, a Buddhist meditation centre. And I went into that with such a high degree of kind of verve and zest. I thought, yes, this is the thing for me. This is what my heart's calling for and yearning for. And it's the one moment in my life, probably in terms of vocation, where I felt utterly aligned. And so I went into that with gusto and really kind of childlike, wide open eyes. And again, similar to the nurse training, I was offered, a group of people to be with, a very small group, a group of about 8 other people. There was a building, the meditation center itself, giving me a sense of, like I belong here. This is part of me for the duration of my time here. Maybe even more so than in the hospital, because like in the meditation center, there was this very sacred meditation hall and, Buddha statues all over the place and stuff. So I really felt like, in a very overt sense, all right, I can give myself to this. I can almost surrender to this. This is what I'm giving myself to. So a very clear relationship of belonging there. And then lastly, the place where me and you met, Embercombe in Devon, land-based environmental project. And I moved on from Gaia House because it didn't give me quite that sense of earthiness. I really literally and metaphorically wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to live closer to the earth. So I ended up at Embercombe, living in a wooden cabin for a while and living in yurts and things like that. And the thing about Embercombe, I think, was, again, I think it kind of accentuated and was the icing on the cake, I think, of all those other kind of experiences around belonging. So sitting around a fire circle on a daily basis, checking in, and also the impact that the land had, and how the land would really kind of hold me. For me, being held in nature and getting a sense of belonging with other living things is really, really important to me. And sometimes, I talk about that and I'm a little bit skittish in talking about it because it seems a little bit, esoteric, or a little bit off beam, or a little bit abstract or intangible. But I have to say that when I'm feeling out of sync or distressed or discombobulated, sometimes the best thing I can do is walk out along country lanes, look at the hedgerows, look out at the horizon, look up in the sky to see what birds are doing their thing. And then I kind of get a sense of, right, it's okay, it's all right, my feet are on the ground, I'm here. And we might talk more about this. There's something for me, Alexander, about the relative constancy and regularity and reliability of non-human nature doing its thing that I find that I can really rest in and rely on. So I think in the last podcast episode, I got all excited because I mentioned seeing my first swallow of the season. So in amidst all this kind of human turmoil and chaos, particularly at the moment with the pandemic, for me to have something which is relatively constant and reliable and is a thing of also, has a real kind of sense of beauty about it, the natural world, and a sense of aliveness and presentness, that in itself can give me a really strong sense of belonging.
One of the things that comes to me as you're talking, Neil, is that perhaps a necessary step. Well, a couple of things came to me. One is belonging a sort of binary thing? Like we either have a sense of total belonging. Because one of the things that struck me about the scenarios you were talking about was that they sounded total. Like they didn't sound like you had a bit of belonging. You had reached belonging. You had a place and you had people and you had rituals and you had work. And altogether, you felt this completedness of belonging is kind of what I heard in that. And so I wonder whether belonging has to be binary. You either belong or you don't, or whether you can find a bit of belonging along the way. So that was one thing that kind of occurred to me. And then the other thing that occurred to me, especially in that last bit where you were talking about your connection with nature and how that is a bit odd, maybe, or that you are a bit shy of sharing that, that self-acceptance has to be perhaps an intrinsic part of our search for belonging. Because if we go searching for what we think we should need to belong, well, I've been told that belonging is found in a spiritual life. So I'm going to go to India or I'm going to go to Thailand, and then in those places I'm going to find my belonging. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. And so if I think about times in my life where I've sort of had flashes of belonging, then I would say that the natural world around me was kind of icing on the cake. That was a nice thing that finished off the experience for me. But it was the people that mattered to me. And it's almost entirely the people that mattered to me. So for me, belonging is mostly found when I feel with my people, with my tribe, with people who see me and recognize me and accept me for who I am, and then can shine back to me a bit of who I am. I've always found it really reassuring and really kind of flattering when someone says to me, well, you wouldn't like that because, or, well, you're a bit, and they give me a reflection back of how I am. I don't get that very often. And so to have that is always really nice. And that's one of those things that makes me feel like, you are one of my people and I feel like I belong with you. So in order for me to find belonging, I have to accept that for me, people are the thing, and that's going to be the main thing that I'm looking for. I think, in answer to my own question, I don't think belonging is a binary thing. I don't think you either belong or you don't. I think that wouldn't it be wonderful, wouldn't it be utopian, and wouldn't it be brilliant if we could reach a point of total belonging as a sustained part of our lives and have this really clear idea about, well, I need these people and this place and these things happening around me, and I need to feel like this, and these are the things that make me feel like I belong. And then reach that state and have that state kind of envelop us and hold us for our whole lives. I think that's kind of the dream. And I also think we need to be aware of perfectionism. That we won't go searching. We won't risk the experience of opening up to people or allowing ourselves different experiences in order to kind of experiment and play with the idea of belonging, because we're not going to do it until everything's perfect, until everything is in the right place. And I think another thing that occurs to me is that vulnerability is a huge part of this journey. If we can't let people see us, and if we can't speak our truth, I mean, initially to very close people, our tribe, our most trusted circle, but ultimately having the skill and the confidence and the self-awareness to be able to speak how we feel without reservation to groups of people, if we don't have that skill, then how are we going to get something back? How are we going to belong? How are we going to be held and supported and feel like we're one of a group, a place? If we can't go, this is the identity that I bring, this is the person I am, and these are the things that I feel, these are the things that I believe. So I really think, I'm sort of thinking now about the things that stand in our way and the things that hold us back from belonging. And one of them surely is, am I ready to be vulnerable and be seen as I am?
Yeah, listen, thank you, mate. I think definitely. I hadn't firstly, just back to your first observation about, is belonging binary? Did you either have it or not, or can you have little bits of it? I'd never really considered that, and I find a kind of contradiction in my response, because my experiences of that I outlined were more of the kind of totalizing nature. It was like a wraparound experience, and there were kind of dissonant experiences within that, but overall I felt like, I belong. I mean, belonging it doesn't mean to say that everything's rosy. I can still face challenges and be out of sorts, but still belong. So my experience would say that it was a totalizing thing, but then I don't actually believe that in my heart, and not in my kind of experience, kind of day to day. So again, just taking the example of walking out along the lanes, and getting a sense of belonging, whereas then I might be doing something else during the day where I feel very disconnected from myself and others and the world in general. The point you raised about vulnerability, I think, is a really important and interesting one, and it makes me think. Real life example. This afternoon, I've got a meeting with a couple of people who I've met a few times before, and the kind of implicit kind of boundaries of the meeting is that it's relatively kind of professional. It's not, there isn't a lot of self-disclosure necessarily. But today, even prior to you mentioning that, I was thinking, actually, do you know what? I feel like I have a need just to open up a little bit more, just to maybe even take a few risks, just to say, hey, look, this is going on for me, rather than just kind of keep it all sort of, in inverted commas, professional, And so I think you've highlighted something really important there, because when I think for myself, when I allow myself to be vulnerable, then I allow myself to be met. I allow myself to be connected with. I allow people to kind of come towards me. I allow people to help me. So I allow myself to be joined with, So I think that's a critical part. And I think that how beautifully that dovetails with the bit you said, allied to that around not seeking perfection. It's funny, isn't it, how like rather than kind of seek perfection, if I kind of acknowledge myself as this sometimes flawed, kind of struggling human being, and then actually and I open myself up to other people being that person, then what comes is a greater sense of belonging, rather than trying to adhere to some sort of perfectionistic ideal of some group identity or individual identity or whatever. So
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing my bits of research into this, there's some very clear patterns that were coming together from the stuff I was reading, and I was just reflecting on my own experience as well. And one thing is to do with the instincts that we've lost in our culture that foster a sense of belonging. We're highly individual. I had someone refer to this as the age of radical loneliness. And that is what we're living in at the moment. Our culture says be alone or be in a little family group, but keep your little group separate from all others. And it's something that's really been encouraged in our culture over the last 100 years or so. And there are political motivators for that, and there are economic motivators for that, and there are also some much deeper kind of philosophical motivators for that. And that's a thing that might be worth exploring at some point. But if we're going to want some kind of sense of belonging, then we have to relearn a lot of skills. Things like saying yes more than we say no, the capacity to let people in, allowing for some kind of group identity, noticing in the way that we talk, in the way that we act, how we balance separateness versus togetherness. And how do we balance those two things in our choices and in our social interactions and just in the words we use? Someone once said to me, it was back at Embercombe, someone once said to me, he'd spent his life living in communities and I was still quite new to it. And he said to me, gossip is the lifeblood of community. And it's quite counterproductive because we think about this belonging thing and we think about it being a lovely thing. And gossip is often quite a hostile thing. And yet community, and we've explored community and belonging are absolutely not necessarily linked, but communities are based on people talking about each other and talking behind each other's backs, and actually that's a necessary part of the functioning of a community. And so when we open ourselves up to this belonging thing, it may not just be, oh, this feels wonderful. It might also require some hard work from us and relearning skills and having that capacity to remain vulnerable while managing ourselves and reaching out and connecting with people and letting them see us, but also making sure that there are good boundaries in place here and that we're managing that relationship well. And I think the word that kind of summed up a lot of this for me, and you used it earlier, Neil, is surrender. And I think surrender is an incredibly powerful word. I think it's that when we find where we want to be and the people we want to spend time with, who we might choose to call our tribe, we're going to have to surrender something. We surrender the totality of individual self-determination. We surrender the idea of keeping bits of us private that are, unpalatable and we don't really want anyone to see, because if we don't let people see that, do we really feel like we're accepted? Will we really feel like we belong? And there's something really magical and really terrifying about the idea of surrender, especially in our culture at the moment, with the way that it is and the way that we're supposed to all be able to choose exactly who we are and what we're going to do with our lives and keep ourselves separate from other people. There's something about surrendering aspects of that that I think is kind of necessary to fostering the sense of belonging. It's absolutely about making the good choice. You don't want to surrender your self-determination and your total self-identity to just anyone, but I think it's a necessary part of the process.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about this beforehand, didn't we? And I was really intrigued by your introducing this notion of surrender, and it made me think of living at Embercombe, and this is something I've often really struggled to articulate, but I'm going to give it another go and see how I get on this time, the umpteenth time of trying to kind of articulate this. But simply put, I suppose there's something, if you say surrender to someone, people think automatically about giving up. They might think about giving up something. They might think about loss.
Mm.
But I think that people don't entertain the flip side of that, and that is the gain. So
Mm.
taking the example of Embercombe. Now, I lived at Embercombe for 18 months, and it was great because I was living in a communal situation, but it was also incredibly challenging because there was actually, for me, very, very little privacy. So I think what I kind of gave up was, or what I surrendered to the fact that I was in this smorgasbord mishmash of people that I couldn't predict who would be around at any one point of time. And I think I just surrendered to the fact that I'm not necessarily going to have a lot of privacy here, but the private aspects of myself that might not otherwise be revealed, actually, by revealing those and letting those be shared, gave me a huge amount in terms of my own growth and learning about my emotional self. And also, it allowed other people to give. So I often think that, again, me and you, we often talk about individuals versus, society and stuff. And so another aspect of this for me is if I surrender, then actually it allows me to be joined with again. So I give something up, I let go of something, and just a reminder to myself that's not just about me. That actually enables and fosters a different possible response from someone else, which is more connecting, which is more joining with, which I would argue nurtures that sense of belonging. And that's what happened at Embercombe. And it was interesting because I felt sometimes I was just pushed into it. I didn't have anywhere to run because the place was so busy. So I was forced into being maybe more social than I might naturally have chosen to be. And sometimes, like I said, that was a bit scary, sort of emotionally, or I felt like, oh, what do I do? People are clamoring in on me. And that was challenging. I had to work with that. And at other times, it just forced me just to kind of drop my shoulders and just give into it and just see where it would go. So I don't know. Yeah, like I said, that's my umpteenth time of trying to articulate that experience. But I think it's really important what you say. And I'm reminded of not the book itself, but the title that leaps out at me. There's a book by a Buddhist teacher called Stephen Batchelor, and the book title is called Alone with Others. So this, rather than taking a binary sort of either or stance, just as this kind of acknowledgement, yes, we are alone in a very real way, but we're also in a very real way utterly with others. And I think we've kind of like taught ourselves socially and culturally and historically not to believe that. But we are actually not alone. And it's interesting, me and you kind of steeped in the world of kind of psychological literature. And if you read any sort of psychological text, the sort of locus, the focus of the whole piece of writing is invariably the individual human being. Yes, there's this thing called social psychology, but it's almost a little bit of a the extension of the social realm is only quite small within social psychology. So for me, something I really like coming back to again and again in this podcast for me is just reminding myself, if not anyone else, that I'm not alone. Actually, we've kind of learned, I think, that we are alone, but I think our ancestors, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago even, didn't have, they didn't live with this sense of kind of alienation and stuff. So to me, that speaks to the fact that it's reclaimable. We haven't always been like this. So for me, that makes a discussion around belonging really, really relevant.
I think your point around allowing people to give to you is hugely relevant, Neil. I think that's really big and it's a real challenge. Again, I think
Yeah.
we're so deeply ingrained the idea that you should be independent, and you should be separate, and you should be cut off from everyone else. And I guess the way I kind of see this, I've been talking to a number of clients about this recently. Ultimately, that one I trace back to we all have a tremendous amount of love that we want to give to the world. That sounds like slightly cliche and slightly like a sidestep, but stick with me for a sec. We all have this amount of love that we want to give to the world. We are filled with love and we want to share it and we want to receive it back. But it's such a stunted feeling. We haven't really had an opportunity to develop the instincts around this. So what we end up doing is we look for a person or a couple of people who we feel we can trust, and then we channel all our love to them. And we do it by doing nice things for them, often. It feels so good to do nice things for the people that we love. But when we are confronted with the idea of letting them do nice things for us, that can often be really, really challenging. And it has to do with this deeply ingrained cultural programming around you should be alone and you shouldn't need other people. But we do. And so it can be so nice to just go, all right, I'm going to surrender this and I'm going to let you do nice things for you. That's the coming back to aspect of belonging. That's the it's not just you alone forging your identity, forging your way in the world, doing everything that you need to do to keep your family safe or to do your job well or to keep up with your friends. But there's something coming back and it says to you, we care and we're here for you and we see you and we accept you and let us look after you sometimes. For me, that's a huge part of belonging.
It's interesting, I'm smiling because, what I was saying earlier, which still holds true for me, the sense of belonging and being held that I get from being in the natural world and bird watching and walking along my local lanes and seeing the seasons change and seeing the first swallow and all of that. All of that is true. And what you've just said there is that I kind of gave myself a little wry smile because sometimes I can, use that kind of nature-based belonging as a sort of kind of substitutive thing, thinking that, I don't really have to kind of pay so much attention to other members of the same species. But it makes me just sort of reflect with a lot of humility, think, oh, for goodness sake, Neil, come on. It's like the starting point really, for me, it just makes me think about it has to be kind of members of the same species. I have to be able to kind of, rub along with and give and receive in relation to, other people around me. It's not that I am quite a social person in my own way. So maybe I'm sort of, over-egging that bit that I just said to make a point. But what you said really strikes me. And what also strikes me, Alexander, is, this thing about giving and receiving being a kind of core part of belonging, knowing that, and I think it's an element, an aspect of what you said around, our identities being not contained just within ourselves, but our identities being diffuse or diffused. So I get a sense of my own identity and my sense of belongingness and my own value by, as you said, allowing someone to do something for me. And I was smiling to myself because I can be pretty rubbish at this. It's a real lifelong learning. It's like my partner will say to me, can I help you with that? And I go, no, I'm fine. It's all right. And then a few hours later, I just crumple in a heap saying, I need some help. and it's really hard because it's really hard. Seriously, the reason I think why it's so hard for me to accept help is because it can feel like I'm in an excruciatingly vulnerable position. Like I make myself so vulnerable. It's almost like I'm implicitly kind of communicating something like, I can't cope. I can't do this. And all the sort of attendant wonky stories that go on, like I'm hopeless or I'm rubbish or I'm no good at this and all those sort of things. So I think in those moments, the obstacle for me to kind of actually fessing up and saying, I really need some help here. I can't do this, the obstacles are all of those things, all of those voices and sort of learned notions. So that's really helpful. It's just a really simple reminder, oh yes, I need to kind of start with other people, and I've mentioned this several times in previous podcasts, but just picking up on what you said about we can do some of this stuff with our friends and people we know well, but actually for me it also relates to passers-by, shop, moving out of the way, let someone go by, holding a door open for someone, or speaking to one of the shopkeepers in town, or whatever it is. So for me the word is mutuality. If I can foster a sense of being involved in, partake in, a felt sense of mutuality, there's a shared phenomenon going on here. There's two people, there's this thing which transcends the two individuals involved, then that certainly feeds and enhances and nurtures my sense of belonging on the planet, to this species. Okay, that was a bit of a ramble maybe, but a heartfelt ramble nonetheless. We are very nearly up for time today. So, Alexander, any final thoughts or comments from you?
Yeah, I'm glancing down through my notes and realising there's an awful lot that I didn't say. This is just an enormous topic. I think the last thing I'd like to say is, for anyone listening to this, we are amazingly adaptive creatures as humans. If you think that genetically we are basically identical to other mammals, and yet we live in these elaborate societies with their rituals and their aloneness and this industrial way of working, we have adapted to this really well, and we do it from infancy. We do it from really early in our lives. So it's really deeply ingrained stuff. And if we want to reclaim this sense of belonging, then I think it requires a lot of reflection and a lot of going towards our feelings. And I would say that we've talked a lot today about belonging being about people, and I don't think it has to be. Neil, you talked about it being about connection with nature. So if you're going to reflect on this, I would just encourage you to think about the different things that belonging might include for you. And it's absolutely not an either or thing. So it might be the people you surround yourself. Who is your tribe? Who do you want more of in your life? And what do they like, and where are you likely to meet them? It might be the kind of work that you do and how you behave at work and how you show up and whether you foster a sense of belonging there. It might be your hobbies or the habits that you have and the rituals that you have during your day. How do they reflect back to you who you are and reassure you about your identity? It could be the place. It could be your connection with the wild and with nature. And it could be a sense of continuity through time. So we talked a little bit about this in our last episode about on death and dying, when we're talking about ancestry and how we revere or connect with those who've come before us and how we hope to be remembered afterwards. So just things like that. If you want to kind of dig into this and foster a sense of belonging in your life, then those are a few kind of subjects and topics that I'd encourage you to reflect on. Those are my final thoughts.
Thank you, Alexander. I'm just thinking whether I have anything to add on that. And I think that for me, it's almost like a kind of takeaway from today. If I ask myself, what would the takeaway from today be? It would be around these notions of surrender and giving and receiving and the mutuality of those things, and how in the giving there's a receiving, and in the receiving there's a giving. So people love to give. Generally speaking, I find that people love to give. If someone's got a problem, we kind of think in our own little individual enclosed minds, oh, no one's going to help me. But actually, my experience is that quite often you get a number of people kind of knocking on the door or creating a WhatsApp group for you or something like that. So my invitation, and this is always, as always, note to self as well, just to kind of invite that, really. So yeah, lovely. Okay, great. Well, that was really enjoyable. That was lovely for me. Always good to kind of discuss these very significant topics. Next time round, in a couple of weeks, we'll be taking on the question, what is love? So again, as per usual with the Big Yearning podcast, we are not going small on things, we are going large. So what we're going to be doing in that episode is really trying to kind of get to grips with that word and sort of deconstruct it and see what it might mean and how we might sort of operationalize it, for want of a better word. But you'll have to tune in to find out exactly what we talk about. Okay, so that's the end of our episode for today. We very much hope you've enjoyed listening. So if people want to get in touch with you, Alexander, about anything to do with the podcast or your practice or your book or anything that you're up to, what is the best way for them to do that?
You can head over to deepcoaching.co.uk. That's my website. In the top right, you'll see a button that says book a consultation, and that's how you can have a chat with me. There's also a link on that page if you just want to drop me an email. And also, if you are interested in my book, then there's details for that at the bottom of the homepage. So deepcoaching.co.uk.
Great, thank you. And if people want to contact me, the best way is through my website, which is www.coachingforlifefroome.co.uk, and go to the contact details page and you can email me or phone me. Okay, so thank you again for listening, and we very much look forward to catching up with you next time round, where the topic will be what is love. So go well, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.